On behalf of the Office of University Life and the Office of the Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's event, the Women of Color Roundtable with Columbia faculty. This event is part of University Life's Graduate Initiative for Inclusion and Engagement, which you can find out more about on our website, universitylife.columbia.edu. Through this initiative, we host panel discussions and workshops for graduate and professional school students with the aim to build community across Columbia's many schools. We are in our 5th week as a community of operating virtually, and I want to congratulate all of us for making it to this point. I know that it hasn't been an easy or seamless transition, and I know that many of us are still challenged in finding a new place of equilibrium. My hope is that tonight's conversation will in some way be restorative for us. To begin this evening's event, we're going to do a little icebreaker with the students in attendance. We're going to assign each of you to a breakout room to meet with some of the other folks in attendance. When we've held these events in person, the community building pieces have been particularly meaningful and useful. We'd like to provide this opportunity, even if in just a small way, through this icebreaker activity. You'll be in these breakout rooms for about 10 minutes. Please be mindful of the time and make sure everyone in your group has an opportunity to share. In the breakout rooms, we'd like each person to introduce themselves, share what school they are in, share what city they are currently living in, share one thing that is going well and one challenge. Please be concise in your sharing so that each person has an opportunity to contribute. Again, here's what you'll do in the breakout rooms. Introduce yourself, share what school you're in, share what city you are currently living in, one thing that is going well, and one challenge. Okay, enjoy the icebreaker. We'll meet you back here in about 10 minutes. Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed that, and perhaps you were even able to make some new connections and expand your Columbia community network. Another virtual community building opportunity I'd like to share with you is our Facebook group, Columbia University Graduate Students of Color and Allies page. I'll put the link for that group in our chat in a few minutes. We're about to go into this evening's main conversation, but first I'd like to review a few housekeeping items. Please keep your audio turned off during the panel discussion. For your layout, we recommend speaker view, not gallery view. During the Q&A portion of the program, which will be after the panel discussion, please use the chat feature and address your questions to Professor June Cross. If you're having any technical issues, please contact University Life via the chat feature. Again, for panelist questions, send a chat to Professor Cross, and for technical issues, send a chat to University Life. Also, please note that Professor Cross will need to leave the event at 5:25 precisely, as she has another commitment directly after this one. Lastly, this program will be recorded and shared with the Columbia community via the University Life YouTube channel. This is so students in various time zones can access our programming. Should you have any questions about this, please contact University Life. Now, on to this evening's program. Unfortunately, Dr. Negrón-Muntaner was not able to join us this evening, but Dr. Alcantara has very graciously agreed to participate. Thank you so much, Dr. Alcantara. This is a very special evening, an opportunity to put spotlight on voices that are often not heard, the stories of women of color and higher education. And to do so, we've pulled together a stellar group of panelists. I'm going to share very brief introductions for each panelist, plus our moderator. I'd like to encourage all of you to research each of these remarkable scholars. They are all incredibly accomplished, but for the sake of time, I've shortened their bios for tonight's event to allow more conversation time. So first up is Associate Professor Carmela Alcantara, whose interdisciplinary research integrates psychology, public health, social work, and medicine to understand how structural and social factors affect sleep, mental health, and cardiovascular health, particularly in racial, ethnic, and immigrant communities. A licensed clinical psychologist with postdoctoral training in public health and behavioral medicine, she's a faculty affiliate of the Social Intervention Group and the Columbia Population Research Center. Next, we have Dr. Christine Hendon from the Fu Foundation School of Engineering and Applied Science, where she is an associate professor in the Department of Electrical Engineering. Her research interests are in developing optical imaging and spectroscopy instruments for applications in cardiac electrophysiology and interventional cardiology. We also have Dr. Jennifer Manley from the Vagelos College of Physicians and Surgeons, where she is a professor of neuropsychology at the Gertrude Cervinsky Center and the Taub Institute for Research in Aging and Alzheimer's Disease. Her research on cultural, medical, and genetic predictors of cognitive aging and Alzheimer's disease among African Americans and Hispanics has been funded by the National Institute on Aging and the Alzheimer's Association. She serves on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Advisory Council on Alzheimer's Research, Care, and Services, and is a member of the Alzheimer's Association Medical and Scientific Research Board. And our last panelist tonight is Dr. Ngai, who is the Lung Family Professor of Asian American Studies and Professor of History here at Columbia. She is a U.S. legal and political historian interested in questions of immigration, citizenship, and nationalism. She is author of the award-winning Impossible Subjects, Illegal Aliens and the Making of Modern America, and The Lucky Ones, One Family and the Extraordinary Invention of Chinese America. She has written for the Washington Post, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, The Nation, and the Boston Review. Today's conversation will be facilitated by Professor June Cross, who is an award-winning producer and writer with over 30 years of television news and documentary experience. She was an executive producer for This Far by Faith, a 6-part PBS series on the African-American religious experience, and her film, Secret Daughter, an autobiographical film that examined how race and color had affected her family, won an Emmy and was honored at the DuPont Columbia Award for Excellence in Broadcast Journalism. So you can see you are in good hands. With that, I'll turn it over to Professor June Cross to begin our conversation. Thank you.
Hey, thank you so much. It's an honor and very strange to be here, sitting in my t-shirt in my home office where I have been living, it feels like, for the last couple of weeks as I'm working on a documentary and still doing a lot of reporting, and it feels like work just never ends. I don't know if my fellow colleagues feel like this, but it's like they just never, it's like you're home and you never leave and you're just working all the time. So thank you, all of you. I was totally intimidated reading your bios. I was wondering, are any of you first generation academics? Are you anyone here? Could you just talk about 2 of you? Great. I am too. So 3. All right. I thought maybe we'd start with that, sort of like navigating the academy as a first generation person in college and graduate school, whatever it was, and how did you deal with the sense of otherness that often strikes us when we are in that position? Anyone who wants to start? Maybe May, since you're the specialist in immigration here. I don't know. But
I'm not a first generation.
Okay, sorry. I'll go for Okay.
Sure, I'm happy to start, and I can, I just have a caveat. I have a 2-year-old, so June, when you mentioned sort of managing and work, it's the professional work and then all the homework. So far, someone's very cooperative on the floor, so there with me. I love that we're starting out talking about first generation status, because I think it's one of the parts of, I think, social identity that I feel like there's more conversation about it now. But when I remember being in graduate school, and I'm curious if the graduate students here agree, but there wasn't a lot of discussion about it. It was one of these like silent statuses that wasn't visible unless you explicitly mentioned it or talked about it. And I know it's been, I think it's been a struggle, I think as a graduate student, and then even in my professional career, it's been a challenge to always to make a point of sharing accomplishments with my family in terms of explaining what the milestones mean. For example, I was recently awarded tenure at Columbia, which I'm very happy about. Thank you. I love the thumbs up. Still quite fresh. And one of the calls, literally, I was in my office. I called my mom to tell her, and the best way that I could explain tenure was I have a job for life. And it was important that in that moment, you know, that was one of the first, I think she was the second call. I called my husband first, but don't tell her. You know, she was that they were the key people I told, even if this process that was isolating and not, you know, familiar to them, so that it could be a shared experience. So, I mean, from my perspective, it feels like there's more conversations happening about it, but it is a silent social identity. And I appreciate the opportunity, I think, to talk about it now. So I'm happy to stop there. And if other thoughts come to mind, I can chime in later.
I remember not even knowing what tenure was when I was invited to apply for tenure. I had to go do some research. Jennifer and Christine, either of you would like to? Christine, you.
Yes.
First.
So one, it's wonderful to see so many participants. This is very exciting. So I would say probably the most challenging part is during graduate school and postdoc, where you don't really know what path you should be taking, you know, what the milestone should be when you should have your first paper, because you don't necessarily have very close role models within your family who are constantly checking in on you. And of course, you know, family members were able to give a lot of emotional support, which was extremely crucial during graduate school. And so I think that was very helpful. And so I think the way that I was able to make it was trying to develop those friendships and mentors along the way, who would give me nice, honest feedback to say, you should be working on your first paper right now. I was like, oh, I didn't know. Like I would literally not know when I should be publishing or if I should be applying for fellowships and things like that. And so I think as a first generation, it's good to reach out to get that feedback, because, you know, your own family members wouldn't necessarily know that feedback that you would need at any particular point within your career.
Right, yeah. Jennifer?
I would just add that of the group that I have right now in my my research lab, there are a number of first generation grad students and postdoctoral fellows. And the one thing I can say that I feel proud of about providing to them is each other, a community of people, sort of a critical mass of people who are first generation. We're very lucky that that's happening within our group and they can speak with each other. They also have contacts in other universities and other labs. They find a community virtually and check in, because that there's a constant feeling of otherness, even though, you know, some of the milestones that you talked about, Christine, about not knowing when should you have your first paper, not knowing, you know, sort of some of these ins and outs, a lot of people, regardless of their, generation status in academia, are unclear about that, unsure about that. But the burden of the first generation student is just that constant feeling of that you're not belonging, that you're unsure of yourself, of your place, and that I guess, better known as imposter syndrome. I'm not sure if it fits exactly right on, but it's been very important to normalize that in our group.
May, I see you shaking your head as if all of these experiences feel familiar, even though you say you're not a first generation. Can you talk a bit about what was helpful in navigating and what wasn't, what was so different that it just wasn't helpful?
My parents were medical academics, so it was not quite the same thing, but I'm not a first generation academic, but I really appreciate what other people are saying, because I think any person of color, especially a woman of color, going into the academy faces similar issues, regardless of being first generation or not. Not knowing what the milestones are. I think the importance of mentors cannot be overstated, because most people in our departments just think everybody knows what to do, and actually we don't know what to do, and we suffer from imposter syndrome, like Jennifer said. So I think mentorship is really important, and I think those of us who are in a position to mentor others, it's really our responsibility to do that. And I spend a lot of time doing that. It's labor that is not recognized by our superiors or our colleagues, but we do it anyway because we need to and we want to. And that's mentoring our junior colleagues, it's mentoring graduate students, it's mentoring undergraduate students. As Columbia becomes more diverse, which is a good thing, it does not actually have the resources or investments or commitments to make sure that the diverse students that we're admitting really are able to succeed. So it falls upon the faculty, especially faculty of color, to do that. And I feel that's part of our job. But I just want to underscore the importance of mentoring. I found good mentors. They weren't all necessarily people of color, but they were really progressive and they helped me. And I think, find a mentor. If you don't have one, find one. There's somebody out there for you.
Yeah, how do you find a mentor? I often found that I stumbled across them. The word mentorship, I think I'm a little older than all of you. So for me, the word mentorship wasn't even a concept. It was just like, who's going to teach me what it is I need to know? But I'm interested in, this is one of the questions that's come up from the group before we even had this panel, was how do you go about finding a mentor?
Well, there's formal mentoring and then there's informal mentoring. Formal mentoring is a good thing, but it has to be managed. Some departments have formal mentorships for junior faculty, and sometimes they're assigned, which I think is a bad thing. Sometimes it's a mutual arrangement between a senior and a junior person, but there's a formal requirement that you have a mentor. And you can refuse it, I suppose, but I don't think anybody really refuses it. And that's for everybody who's in a non-tenured position. But I think informal mentoring and peer mentoring is also really important. I don't know how you find when you ask the people who you think you trust, people that are your teachers or teaching assistants or your peers. I think most of us in communities of color understand questions of social solidarity and collectivity and helping one another. And don't be afraid to reach out. You don't have to say, will you be my mentor? Just say, can we talk more?
Yeah,
can we have coffee? Can we talk more? Can I learn more from your experience and build relationships? Something about academia, so much of our research is solitary. You know, not every field. A lot of the sciences are very collaborative, and people work in labs. But you know, in my discipline, you go to the archive by yourself. It's just you and the dead people in the papers.
Right.
It's a very solitary experience, and I think we have to build communities.
Mm. Christine and Jennifer, you're both in the sciences. How did you find mentors?
For me, I ask a lot of questions. That's just who I am, and whoever answered them became my mentor. Whoever I got to talking to, I collected a lot of them. I have a lot. Some of them are, you know, the more traditional, like who was my dissertation advisor and whose lab I was in. But some of them are really not like that at all. They're people I found at conferences. They are, you know, even many of my mentors are more on the peer level. Like I have a call every week with 2 other African-American women who do Alzheimer's disease research. We're like the only ones. And so we call each other every week and check in. And so I consider them mentors to me as well.
Christine?
Yeah, I think it's the same as Jennifer. Some were former professors that that I got along very well with, or professors who were very great at giving feedback. And so these are professors from my undergraduate career that I still keep in touch with. Others, you know, I've met at conferences, and they seem just very engaging and open, and would give honest feedback, you know, like right on the spot, or they would say, if you have any questions, you know, just contact me. And so I'll actually follow up. And others are peers, sometimes outside of academia, outside of science. Sometimes I talk with my friends who in all different industries, but they still are, you know, addressing similar types of, you know, conflicts or problems within their work. So even recently, I was speaking with a friend about transitioning from in-person teaching to online teaching, and she gave me really great feedback. And she's a lawyer, and the students responded really well. So I try to get a lot of diverse opinions that way.
Yeah, it is. Carmela, I tend to think of social work as a more diverse field, but I may be totally wrong about that. And I see, who are we seeing there? Is that your son? Who is he? Hi.
Hi, this is Daniel.
Daniel.
I've needed mentoring around that too. So it's been, I think,
embrace it.
I appreciate everyone's openness. I think, yeah, and I've been in social work, and I've been in medicine and psychology and sort of public health. And I think just want to echo what the other panelists have said, which is about team mentoring and just the importance of identifying mentors, you know, who are going to be suitable to nourish your different goals. My son loves jazz, so that's some jazz book in the background. But to nourish those separate goals. And so, you know, having a mentor in your specific content area, a mentor who's like trajectory you see and sort of want to model. And then to this point of peer mentoring, I also found it really helpful to have not just sort of, you know, lateral peers, but even some who are, you know, 5 years, 3 years ahead. I mean, and having, you know, getting that kind of mentorship has been really useful too.
Yeah. I'll give you a second since you're dealing with Jenny. I was just getting ready to go I think about the area that you're in, Carmela, as sort of social determinants of health. I don't know if that's I think that's the correct phrase for what you're doing. And one of the things, I recently got into a Twitter discussion with a group of women in color in the academy about whether or not your job have you ever had physical symptoms that you felt were related to your job? And I answered yes, and I want have any of the rest of you ever, and if, what was it? And if so, how did you deal with the situation? How do you maintain mental and physical health when you're in what can sometimes seem to be a, I won't say hostile, but let's say challenging environment?
Well, I don't want to overshare. I mean, I have a medical condition. It's not serious, but it's annoying, and stress is a trigger for it. So that's how I know for sure that if I'm really stressed out, and it's hard to manage our stress. You know, we're stressed all the time because we work so hard, and we have too many burdens. So you know, I mean, somebody mentioned in our breakout, you know, the importance of being able to take a walk. And, you know, I mean, I live at Columbia, you know, I walk a lot, but it's always going somewhere. It's not walking for the sake of walking. And now that we are housebound during the pandemic and I'm not living in the city, my husband and I take a walk every afternoon. We walk for an hour. And it's really good. It's really helpful. So, but I don't, you know, I don't think there's a really, I don't know if we have a good answer for how to deal with stress. You know, you have to relieve yourself of the things that are stressing you. And the things that are stressing you are really things that are messed up.
Yeah.
You know, you try to work to change them, but you know, it's a process. It's, you know, it takes a lot of work.
I was going to add that I guess it was last year, I had a panic attack in the middle of the night, and I had no idea that's what it was. I thought I was dying. I thought I was having a stroke or a heart attack or something. And it was actually during a meeting, our annual International Neuropsychological Society meeting that took place in New York City that year. And I had 30 of my lab members presenting one way or another. We had 30 presentations at that meeting. And we had spent, you know, the month ahead of time, you know, getting everyone's presentations ready. We were all representing at that conference. I was so proud because there's so many men and women of color in my lab that we were like changing the whole face of this meeting that I had been going to for over 20 years. And so, you know, everything had to be on point. We were working with everyone to get their presentations ready. And it was in the middle of that week that that panic attack happened. And I realized like, oh, okay, this is a lot. This is a lot. And part of it was this, I think, pressure that I felt on myself to make sure that we were representing in the best way that we possibly could as a group that is doing social determinants in cognitive aging and Alzheimer's disease, and also just as academics of color. So I think for me, that was a wake-up call, that underneath the surface, I'm a very strong person, I'm a very capable person, and I sort of pride myself like sort of superwoman kind of deal on that. But there are things going on underneath the surface that boil over. And I think that that's becoming better studied and better known, the whole concept of accelerated aging and weathering, that to survive in a high pressure situation as a person of color, as a woman of color, is stressful. And it definitely has a toll on physical and mental health.
Yeah. Christine, do you have anything you'd like
Wait. Is that what is happening to us, Jennifer? Accelerated aging?
I don't really need to hear that either.
Yeah, we can have a whole other session about that. It's a thing, though. It's a thing.
Something I noticed from my senior colleagues was that they always took the last 2 weeks of August off, and either they went to Maine or they did this nice annual family vacation. And I just started instituting that with my family. And it was, to address these same things, because otherwise, there's always another project. You always want to perfect the grant, and it's just like, it's work nonstop. I also have kids, and this you go to work, you deal with the kids, and then they go to bed, and then you're working again, and it's just literally nonstop. And so we've been trying to, ensure that throughout the year we have these things that we look forward to, where we could decompress, and it's already built into our schedule. And so, during the other time, we are still meeting all of our goals, but we're still, we are giving our bodies and our minds some dedicated rest. So we just started implementing that, and that was inspired by some of my, I've noticed that some of my mentors, I've gone through this process where they've been stressed and realized that that can be helpful.
Oh, that's great. I run a program that actually ends on one weekend in August, and then the new class comes in on the Monday, so I don't get that. So I try to take it as soon as I can right after graduation. One thing that hasn't come up that I've learned is that when my body starts telling me that I'm totally stressed out, one of the things I need to look at is, am I putting up with things that are bothering me, that are happening at work, to the extent that I'm like swallowing my feelings. And so sometimes I consider those reactions, those health reactions, a sign that I need to open my mouth and speak up. So I think especially we're all always trying to, at least I do, I'm always trying, you're trying to fight your battles, right? What am I going to take on this struggle, or am I going to swallow it and put up with it and save my chits to fight another day? And a couple of years ago, I actually ended up in the hospital behind something without oversharing. And my doctor said, you need to find a way to deal with this. And it was something that had been bothering me that was going on in the administration of the school. And I finally just decided I was just going to have to go talk to the dean about it. And I did, and it resulted in some change. So it was a lesson in like not putting up with everything just because the majority thinks one thing and you're thinking something. You're sitting there thinking, I think they're all crazy, but is it just me? And I've learned to start, when I get those, is this race, or is it me? Is this sexism, or is it me? That it usually is sexism, it's crazy. Anyway,
Can I add to that? I think this is something we all struggle with. How do you pick your battles? Because you can't fight every single slight. And I am picking more battles. And I have to say, it's also with some cost, because every time I do, this neon sign on my forehead goes off that says "angry woman." And I've just decided I'll live with that, and now when, I have some colleagues who are terrible mansplainers, and they do it to me all the time, and I don't take it anymore. I just say, thank you, X, for explaining what I just said. And he doesn't even hear it, but everybody else hears it. And I feel better. I let that little steam off. And those are small things, right? But we've had some big battles in my department, and I have been very angry, and I will spare the public the details of those, but I have been angry since last year. And I have angry woman on my forehead. And I have colleagues who said to me, that was really great that you spoke up. And I'm like, well, why didn't you speak up? So, okay, I'll wear, I think those of us who have the job security, we have tenure, and, I don't care if they like me anymore.
Yeah,
I'm just gonna say that. I don't care if I'm not there for them to like me. And when it's important, I think we have to really, I've been willing to do that. And I'll say that, you know, this year I'm co-director of ethnic studies in the college, and it has been such a wonderful change because I have a group of colleagues who, you know, we're like-minded, and we are committed to the same issues of social justice and anti-racism, and we're building a great program, and we have to fight for more resources all the time. But I'd rather, you know, so I you know, part of me is like, I'm not gonna even fight in my department. I'll go fight for the things I think are important, but I'm not gonna torture myself sitting through BS, you know. Anyway, so I just think that this is another burden that we carry, June, you know, that if we're not gonna speak up, nobody's gonna speak up.
Yeah.
And so we need to support each other to do that. And I think that's the unfortunate sexism as well as racism, but it's really a lot of sexism that, you know, you're a bitch if you speak up.
Yeah.
And
we've got a couple of questions related to this, so we've obviously hit a nerve.
yeah, right. You can tell I'm still angry, right?
Right. How do you choose which battles to pick to fight? And how do you compartmentalize the ones you choose not to fight so that they're not driving you crazy at 3 a.m. in the morning? And I think sort of related to that, for those of us that are, sort of on the graduate track and haven't hit a level of security yet, how do you deal with leadership or you know, the professors above you who are not supportive or are giving you a hard time?
Well, on the first point, on the first point, I think the battles to pick are the ones that aren't necessarily about you. You know, the battles I fought were over hiring decisions, over tenure decisions, not mine, but other people's lives and careers, who I thought were being wronged for reasons that were not right, not legitimate intellectual reasons. Those fights I think we have to have. You know, I can take being insulted, maybe not all the time, but, you know, I can swallow a lot of that and vent about it elsewhere, and occasionally, you know, speak up about it. But I think the fights that we pick have to be about making the profession and our departments more inclusive, being supportive of people, standing up when other people are wronged. I think those are the fights that are the most important for us to take up.
Carmela, Christine, Jennifer, how do you guys choose your battles, and how do you deal with the battles that are still nagging at you at 3 a.m.?
I mean, you know, it's interesting because I think that the two, you know, this comment about self-care, sort of how do you cope with the stress, and also how do you pick your battles, are so closely related. And we know with, you know, discrimination, racism, that the events that are ambiguous are the ones that like stick out in our minds and that we're like ruminating about, and that's causing us to stay up. And so I think, you know, I think part of it is making sure that you have your support network that can remind, and I know that I do, that can remind me, even though I study, you know, like Jennifer, study social determinants and health disparities, that this is real, right? Like all of us here on this panel are susceptible to the conditions we study. And, you know, from a graduate student perspective, I think, you know, to the extent that you can fight these battles in a way where you're not alone. And so if it's, you know, in the context of building coalition might be too broad of a term, but that you can sort of build some alliances with fellow students so that it's not just sort of you versus the leadership, but that it's in the context of, you know, a student group, or if it's a class, or so that you're, you know, that you're not directly facing that challenge and can feel empowered to implement change. I know I've definitely have heard lots of successful cases of students really banding together and having, I know in social work, we have definitely had that where because of student demands, it has changed our curriculum. And so, you know, just wanting to emphasize that there is, you know, a lot change that can happen from building these coalitions and not facing these issues alone.
Yeah. Jennifer, Christine?
Yes, I wanted to ask the second part of the question about dealing with professors. So one, I think this is where having mentors can be very helpful because they can help you to navigate, you know, how to speak with or interact with particular professors. But then also for those in doctoral programs, I think this is, at least within engineering, we have a committee model. This is where something where you want to make sure that you don't delay your proposal too long, because the proposal serves a lot of different purposes. And during that meeting, it's you with a committee, and the committee will be able to give your advisor feedback. And then that way you don't feel that your dissertation is solely dependent on this one professor. And, you know, after that meeting, you can continue to meet with committee members and get some additional support that way. Concrete that you can implement, don't delay that proposal and setting up a committee, and that way you don't feel like there's just this one person that is kind of over you.
I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with your field. When you talk about submitting a proposal, you mean like
oh, yeah. Yes. So for PhDs in engineering, the students have to pass a qualifying exam. And then usually about 2 years after that, they have to submit a proposal or they present a proposal which outlines what they're going to complete for their dissertation. And so you have like your aims and you say, these are the experiments I'm going to do, the analysis, these are the papers I'm going to write. And that's a presentation to 3 faculty members. And then the next meeting will be your dissertation defense, which may be, about 2 years, year and a half or so after that. But some students wait too long to do the proposal. And so they miss out on, developing that relationship with these other committee members who could be, extremely valuable in their experience.
Wow, that's great. Great. No, I didn't even understand that process.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that it's specific, you're talking about specifically sort of what happens in engineering, but it's such a good strategy to widen out your support levels. That in general, like what we're talking about, if we're dealing with picking battles, and also there's a question in the chat, like, what do you do when leadership doesn't treat you well? They're sort of related, which is, from the beginning, recognize that any one person could end up being toxic in this situation. So to spread out your support is a really smart strategic move. Because you want there to be multiple sources of support for yourself, and if I would just want to underline something that Carmela said, which is, when I'm trying to choose whether to fight a particular battle, it's bothering me, I'm not sure whether I should take it to the next level, I talk to a trusted set of peers and mentors. I know that they're good at talking about this kind of stuff and fleshing it out with me because we've done it before. And I just sort of get a reality check, and I come up with, possible actions. One is say nothing. The other is go ballistic, and other ones are somewhere in the middle. But I need to talk it out, and I need a trusted group of people. I can't just leave it to, take it on by myself.
Yeah, I have a squad. I sort of have a squad of 4 or 5 women that I rely on, and not necessarily in my field. In fact, sometimes it helps that they're not in your field, but it really helps to, sorry, my husband's in here looking for his mask. There we go. Here I have it, sorry. This is one of the issues with being at home, right? Yeah, you know, your squad doesn't necessarily have to be in your field. Sometimes it helps that they're not, because they can bring other ways of thinking about this. And I think the other good thing that I heard out of this discussion particularly was not being afraid to reach out to people who might be outside of your core group. I have a lot of students at the journalism school where I'm the, well, now there's like 3 women of color that are on the faculty there, but full time. But for a long time, it was me. And women particularly would come, but I've had students from all kinds of marginalized communities come to me and ask for advice. And sometimes don't be afraid to do that, I think is always helpful. Just going down the list of things. How do you advocate for your client or for yourself when you're the only person of color in that space?
So you mean within any particular meeting or sort of department or professional group, how do we advocate for ourselves?
Mm-hmm. How do you navigate spaces, including jobs, where you are the only person of color in the space? And how do you advocate for your client or yourselves, I guess, if you're a person of color? And I'm assuming this means for clients that are also people of color, that maybe you're understanding something that nobody else around you is seeing.
I find, I'll just say quickly that I am often the only person of color in the room. That's like a norm for me. And so I've found that I am not shy to bring up the things that I feel are important, to put those on a list, to listen to, be aware of what the agenda is and listen to what's being said, but find ways to insert the things that I feel are important in there at the right time. I'm pretty unapologetic about it. Maybe part of that is that I'm more senior now. I have tenure, so sort of like May, like I just don't care anymore too much, and so I've found it to be I sleep better at night, and I feel like I've done my job if I represent at least myself loudly inside those spaces, because it's been shown to me over and over again that for the most part the things that I feel are need to change, the topics that I feel like need to be brought up, those are helpful in the end, that people weren't aware, and so yeah, I just need to find a way to get them in there, and we'll deal with the dynamics at some other time, like what May was saying. She if someone tries to mansplain, she has a reaction, and I may or may not pick that mini battle, but the larger one is to get our stuff on the table, to get our topics on the agenda, and I do whatever I can to make sure that they're on.
Right. Yeah.
I'll just add, I think it's really different for people like Jennifer and myself who are senior full professors. If you don't have tenure, you can't say anything about anything. It's really sad to say. You know, you really speak up at your peril. And I think it's a terrible system where we treat our junior colleagues, you know, like apprentices, and they have no power, and they have to prove themselves, and they have to prove themselves by their work. And sometimes that's not even enough, because sometimes people just have weird reasons why they oppose somebody's promotion. I hate to say that, but it's true. And I think women and people of color have a harder time, either because some of our colleagues don't understand what we do, they don't think it's important, or because there's just plain bias. So I think for people who are not tenured, regardless of their race or gender, I think have a really tough time in this business. And so all I can say is you need to find allies. That's why mentors are so important, because there are people who will not only show you what you need to do, like when you should publish articles or, you know, this or that, but also stick up for you and take up the fight for you, because we understand you can't speak up in the room. It's really hard for you to do that. And if you're going to do that, especially, you need allies. So I think that's where mentors are also allies.
Carmela and Christine, I don't know how long you've both been tenured, but I know, Carmela, you said you just got tenure. How did you negotiate that period when you were the junior person and you disagreed with someone, but you still needed to get the point across the plate?
So I'm just submitted my tenure package.
Oh no, you're breaking up on my
side.
I'm sorry, you just submitted your tenure practice.
Yeah, I got the promotion, but yeah, I'm submitting tenure this year, or submitted tenure package this year. But I remember, at least during the application phase, I know there's a big thing with women and negotiations, and you know, at least in sciences and engineering, having a great starter package is extremely essential so that you can get all of the lab resources that you need to actually carry out the experiments to eventually produce a publication. And so for that, I just prepared a lot. You know, I talked with friends who recently started to get a sense of what their starter packages were, because that stuff is not published online. You know, I made a detailed list of everything that I would need. And I figured that if I was detailed, how could they say no if I'm telling them exactly why I need all of this equipment? So I didn't just give out like a blank, you know, number. So I put a lot of effort into that. And so luckily Columbia gave me everything I asked for, which I think was extremely essential for, you know, for you to be actually productive during that time, because it takes a while to get grants, and you need that funding to recruit students and do experiments. So I was extremely prepared for that. And then hopefully next year, I'll have a bigger voice on campus.
Okay. I think I saw a documentary about a woman at MIT who was arguing about, you know, you were an MIT graduate,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
About a woman who was trying to get lab space, and she finally, and her, I think she was one of the first women. Is it Emily Wick? I'm not sure. She literally had to go do research on the amount of space that all the men around her were given in order to prove that she needed the space required. Yeah. And then they still tried to mansplain that the reason that they had more space than she did was because they had more important work or something. And she finally did figure it out. I'm anxious to see. I think it's going to be on I think it's either going to be a Nova or an American Experience, but I'll stay in touch with you.
Thank you.
Carmela, what's been your experience as a young, you know, sort of our newly tenured, when you disagree?
Yeah, I think
I want to lose.
Honest, I think it's been a process of finding my voice, and I feel like probably Jennifer and May might agree or maybe not, but I think You agree, June? You know, and I suspect it'll continue to change as I go, but I know probably probably a few years ago, just I think had the realization about, you know, there's a lot of privilege that comes in the positions that we're in, and, you know, how do you go through this experience and not lose your soul, right? I mean, I have that book on my shelf, and, or, you know, how to, Black Guy, Academic's Guide to Gaining Tenure Without Losing Your Soul. And I think that's key, right? I think of having that support network and figuring out which battles you're going to choose and which ones you won't. And I realizing that there's, you know, it's like a myth thinking that, okay, I get tenure and then I'm going to speak up. It's almost, it is this process of like it unfolding over time, of finding your voice and figuring out you know, how are you going to use your privilege today? And it's not to say you're going to use it in the same ways every day, but I think finding that like source of empowerment, I think particularly, I don't know, in the last 2 or plus years or something, I think has been really, really critical. And I think for graduate students, it's a similar, you know, thinking about it as a process, it's similar. It might be where you are in that moment as a graduate student, and that might differ, you know, 5 years, 10 years from now, but just like, how do you find your voice in that moment so that you can stay with it, you know, for the marathon?
Can I say something about this? I'm actually want to revise slightly what I said before, which is I think that junior faculty should be able to speak up in meetings. They should be able to give their opinions about anything that's on the table. They should be able to have a voice and to express their opinions and to object to things they don't like. And the reason why they can't, the reason why they don't feel they can, is because we have in some, at least in departments I'm familiar with, there is what I would call a toxic culture where people don't feel they have that freedom. And I think that's wrong. And I just want to put that out there because there shouldn't be something inherent about our tenure process that muzzles non-tenured people in faculty meetings. You should be able to go up for tenure and be judged on the merits of your work and by the peers in your field and your department and by the university and achieve on your merits. Yeah. That's the way it's supposed to be. But unfortunately, it's not always like that. Yeah. You have to be more than good. You have to have not pissed a lot of people off. You have to have been, you know, played by the rules, et cetera, et cetera. And so I think that I just want to underscore that because I think those of us who are in more senior positions, one of the battles I think we do have to fight is to change the cultures in our departments so that junior people don't feel that it's too risky for them to speak up about, I mean, it's not even just about fighting for yourself, it's having an opinion about something. You know, departments talk about stuff, some of it's important, some of it's not that important, but everybody should be able to have an opinion and voice their opinion. So I think that to the extent that junior people feel they cannot say anything or almost anything, I mean, there are some people who say some things, I'm not saying it's a complete wall of silence, but to the extent that that's the norm, I think it's really damning for the culture of the university. And I think that's something that we have to change collectively. We have to change that.
Yeah, I think, I think that's one thing that's changed. I mean, just look at the fact that we're having this conversation. It's changed a lot over the last 5 or 6 years. We have a question about how much of the bias that we faced is explicit versus implicit. And I know I often operate from the assumption that it's implicit and that people are just ignorant, but I wonder what the rest of you think. Even the explicit things I tend to take as implicit, which probably gives me a set of blinders that allows me to keep going when unwise. But I wonder about the rest of my colleagues on this panel, how you sort of tally that table of explicit versus implicit bias.
I think it's always mostly implicit. It's mostly implicit because people know better than to say explicitly outrageous things, but it comes out in all and its worst disguise is that they don't think the work is very good.
Yeah. Yeah, Jennifer, I saw you.
Yeah, no, I mean, they don't know better not to, make microaggressions. And that happens a lot. I just have gotten into the practice of, emailing, forwarding emails to my trusted advisors, sort of like, here, look at this. I think that's a microaggression. I just clock it. Because like June was saying, there's so many times that I feel like I'm not aware, I'm not even aware of whether it's implicit or explicit or whether it's a microaggression or not, because I've just been operating in that system for so long, it just goes undetected. I mean, it's a good question, but I think it's right to say that for the most part, it's implicit. But I've also been told by colleagues, and this is more about sex, gender, that behind closed doors, if it's all men, the things that are said are, very different than if there's a woman in the room, and that's explicit. That's explicit. It's just that there's a group who's in and a group who's out.
I feel like I've benefited a lot from some of the senior faculty members within the School of Engineering. We have a lot of great female faculty members within my field, and I think they've helped a lot to shield me from some of this. And so, some examples could be, a senior faculty member given a recommendation for me to be on a conference committee.
Writer, the most prolific imaginable writer, amazing, and some of you have read.
I'm sorry, is that somebody asking a question or is that just breaking in? All right, I missed it.
Yeah, that gives me opportunity to actually show my work to a broader community, and then from there, continue to rise. And so, so I'm extremely grateful for that, and hopefully I can pass that on to those who are behind me, that as I become chairs and stuff like that, I can provide opportunities for other women of color, where I can see their worth, whereas other people may not judge their worth as much, but I can give them those opportunities. And so yeah, so I'm very grateful for all the senior faculty members in the School of Engineering who've been fighting, at those faculty meetings and at the conference meetings.
Yeah, I find I have different allies for different issues, and I've sort of learned to parse them out and go to approach the ones that I need on any given issue, because it's not going to be the same. I've discovered it's never going to be the same group of people on everything. So we have different ones for different things. What book recommendations does anyone have on the panel for graduate students who are first generation academics trying to navigate this entire system? I've never seen there. Well, someone mentioned, Carmela, you mentioned the Black Academics Guide to Getting Ahead Without Losing Your Soul. Is there anything else? I've never seen a book about any of this.
I know, oh my goodness, now I'm forgetting her name. Ruth Sambrania, it was focused on tenured faculty. She's a sociologist at University of Maryland, and she just wrote a book called The Ivory Tower, I think, and it's describing, people of color's experience in academia. I think she has a chapter completely devoted to women of color. So I've seen it from the faculty perspective. I haven't seen it as much from the doctoral student perspective. And then on the imposter syndrome, I know Valerie Young, and I'm happy to email whomever with links to these books, but she's written a book about the imposter syndrome that I thought was pretty good, that talks about, like, if you, like, you might be more, if you have or when you're feeling like an imposter syndrome, you might be more likely to want to, you know, not ask for help and sort of be the rugged individual that figures everything out, which I think applies a lot to like first generation students. So I'm happy to send that to Adina or Shell or
okay. Actually, folks are asking, can I put it in the chat? So what it's called, the Ivory Tower.
Oh, I can try to do that, June, since you're moderating. I can.
Okay. All right. And then the other one, yeah, I missed the other one. And then how do you deal with the group that describes you as the angry Black woman? I don't have any problem being the angry Black woman. So or the angry, I don't know how the rest of you feel. Well, May, you'd be the angry, you already said you wear the angry woman. I discovered an email somebody sent me a chain when I was coming up for tenure, and somebody said, describe me as June says what she means and means what she says. And I was sort of like, well, yeah, I am sort of a straight talker. But fortunately, I'm in journalism, and I think it doesn't quite, the journalism school's much more forgiving about speaking your mind. So anyway, Christine or Jennifer, do you have thoughts either on books or would any of us mind if any of the people on this who are listening to us approach us afterwards? I certainly don't. It's a question of whether I'll have time to get back to you, but feel free.
Yeah, I don't have a book recommendation, but while I was in graduate school and also during my postdoctoral fellowship, I did a lot of future faculty programs. So they have them all across the US at different universities, and those are great. You are able to expand your network, and you'll be able to meet other people like you who are, you know, trying to get into the academic career. So they have them in engineering, and then they also have them in other fields. So they're generally called future faculty. And I highly recommend those programs.
Okay. In the explicit versus, I was just thinking about explicit and implicit, and sort of this conversation about microaggressions that I think I tend to not see microaggressions because for so much of my career I was dealing with macroaggressions. It almost feels like a relief to only have to deal with microaggressions. And that's one thing I've actually learned from the younger generation, is to sort of like actually think about, you know, when I'm bothered, when it sort of rubs me the wrong way, you know, to actually think about that. And I wonder what pieces of advice you each have for dealing with the microaggressions, besides calling your girlfriend up and having a glass of wine or two or three, depending on what the microaggression is. Because it's much more difficult, I find, to try to get people to understand why a microaggression is a microaggression. And they tend to get defensive. First thing is they get defensive, and it's like, oh no, I would never do such a thing. My parents were, you know, whatever. They'll come up.
Some of my best friends are.
Right, you know, or yeah. I'm Jewish. There's no way that I would ever do da, you know.
Yeah, for me, the emphasis isn't so much on trying to get the person who committed it to understand it. It's therapeutic for me to be able to call it out. And, you know, sometimes, most of the time, I am doing that with, you know, a group of either, you know, just my people, whoever they are, my people. Sometimes I call it out in front of them, and it's never fun. I have to be very ready for that. That is never going to go over well. But you know, I think for me, the strategy is more like getting into the practice of actually acknowledging what they are. And I find it to be very much more therapeutic for me to call them out and to recognize them. It's like, oh, instead of saying, oh yeah, well that happens all the time, or not even acknowledge it.
Right, yeah. And how do you deal with the "I'm sorry you felt that way," but you know, which is sort of the non-apology apology?
Well, I'm thinking of one experience in specifically, which is that that kind of non-apology was said in the moment, but that person went away and that person came back later after having some more time to think about it, and I think it had made an impact. It just was so horrible, to have to talk about it in that moment. I wouldn't make that recommendation to anyone. That's not easy. So yeah, I guess the other thing, just saying, and there was a question earlier about that mentioned client. Like in my work, there are participants in our research studies, and they're from the community, and we have a relationship with those people, and we do some forms of community-based participatory research. I find that to be extremely empowering. Like those are also my people, the people who I'm representing in the research that we're doing. And so the community, is also, to some extent, if whoever you're representing and whatever the research is that you're doing or the work that you're doing, it's in the community. So we talked about family earlier. I was going to mention that one of the books, I don't have these books that are being posted in the chat by Carmela and others are amazing and wonderful, like such great resources, but I find my inspiration from books like the autobiography of Angela Davis. It's old, but she was that kind of navigation that she did and the kind of thing that she wrote about is still inspiring to me, even though it's not about academia specifically.
Right. Yeah, there's so much that's sort of out there. I was trying to think of the other book that got a book award. Claudia Rankine's book. Is it just called Race, I think? I'll try to find it and send it around later, which I found really helpful. The way I sort of handle it is to go one-on-one with the person who said the offending thing. I try not to call it out in a group. I lived through enough of those diversity seminars that we had in the 80s and 90s that I learned that that's usually counterproductive.
June, one thing we could read that I've read lately and that could help in this context, it's not so much an inspiration, it's a structure. So it's available on the provost webpage of the university. It is the guidelines for tenure and promotion, and there's another set of guidelines for hiring, for searches. And there is a diversity document. And it tells you, because I chaired a search this past year, and we were very scrupulous about following the steps. And it's a structure that is aimed to minimize bias. You can't get rid of it completely, but you can minimize it. And it's actually very smart. And so, for example, when you discuss candidates, you don't discuss what school they got their PhD from, because that's a kind of elitism that automatically advantages some people and disadvantages other people, right? So I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but it's a public document. It's on the website in the provost's office, or it's also in the arts and sciences. And there's a set of best practices, and it's step by step. How do you run a search to promote inclusion and to minimize bias? It's not called that exactly, but so if you have a structure in place, if you have rules or guidelines in your department for how people are supposed to behave, then you will minimize, or at least you will decrease the likelihood of microaggressions and bias just running rampant. So I just want to say that for those of us in departments where there are searches, where there are promotions, there have been people, I mean, unfortunately, the diversity officer we had in arts and sciences left the university a couple of years ago, but she created some really great documents, and they're still available. So I would just recommend that.
Great. You know what? I have to sign off. I have another another meeting, but maybe I don't know who my designated takeover person is. Eastchell, are you there?
I'm here. I am.
There you go. Okay. I'm
Great.
sorry, everybody. I'm happy to talk with any of you. Just email me, jcross@columbia.edu.
Thank you, June. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. It was so great to meet you. Take care.
It was great having you. Thank you. In our last few minutes, I thought I would ask just all the panelists for any closing thoughts, you know, sort of a lightning round of closing thoughts and guidance you want to offer to the students who are still with us. So how about if we go Jennifer, Carmela, May, and then Christine. So Jennifer, can you start us off?
Sure. I just, I've been looking at the comments. I do want to say that I'd be happy to speak with anyone who wants to follow up at a later point. And Adina did just share this thing that in the chat that I asked her to. I couldn't remember what it was called, but it's a guide to departmental climate best practices. I think that's really well done as well, just like the search document. A lot of departments are aspiring to become more aware and implement some of the suggested activities in that document. So just keep going and you know, get your posse, get your squad together. That would be my suggestion. It's more important now than ever when we're sort of more isolated. We're not walking up and down the halls of our department anymore, so we need to be explicit and find something that works for you. All right. I'm waving at Carmela's son. I'll stop there and go on to the next person.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer. Carmela, any closing thoughts?
Okay. I think I just want to sort of echo what Jennifer said. Really, I think finding your squad is so important in creating, you know, those relationships, both, you know, laterally, so peer mentors and, you know, with faculty mentors, and you know, that it's a marathon. I think it's easy to sort of forget. I know we say that all the time, but I think it's just worthwhile to mention it, that it's a marathon, and that, you know, a lot of the issues we talked about today, we're talking about them in the context of like academic life as professors, but, you know, they've sort of been with us as graduate students as well. And so just to sort of make the point that they don't go away, and developing strategies and being reflexive about how to cope and what to do, I think is just really critical. I just want to thank you guys for being so welcoming and open to Daniel. I definitely thought it would be, and hope it has not been too distracting, but glad he's cooperated. Nothing has flown across the screen, so that's a success. Thank you all.
Hi, Daniel. Is it my turn? Okay. I think this has been a great conversation. And it's a little different than the one we did last year. The last one, Jennifer and I were both on the one last year, and that was great also. That one was more like we were telling war stories. So I think this has been really helpful. But I want to say something different. I want to say that, you know, we didn't talk about what's before us and what we're living through now, this pandemic. Nothing's going to be the same. And I don't know what it's going to be like, but I think our whole world has changed. Our country's changing. The university is going to change in really, really big ways. You know, I feel what's before us in this country is we're at a crossroad. We can come out of this with more progressive policies that address things that we all know. We're not surprised that Black people are suffering from COVID more than anybody else. That's not a surprise to anybody in this room. And yet the media is so surprised about it, right? So we can come out of this with greater commitments to address inequalities in society, or we can come out of this in an authoritarian state. And I don't know which way it's going to go, but we're going to have to play a role in how we come out of this thing in our country and in the world. And I think at the university level, this impacts all the things that we're talking about. We're not going to go back to the normal pick your fights. I think it's going to be really different. I mean, so all this discussion we've had about picking your fights and mentoring, those are really important. And I'm not saying those are going to go away, but what we're going to fight over, I think, could very well change. So just for example, right now, I mean, the university is in a huge financial crisis because of COVID. And to the university's credit, they're taking care of students, they're taking care of the employees. And I applaud the university for that. I think a lot of the response has been humane to the community, to our community. At the same time, the financial hit is enormous. I don't even know what the number is, but I wouldn't be surprised, you know, how huge that number is going to come out to be. We have a hiring freeze. I don't think we're going to have nearly as many graduate students in the future that we've had to this point. And so questions of inclusion and diversity are going to take on a different shape, because when there's a scarcity of resources, where are those resources going to go? We've had, from Medina's office, a tremendous diversity program that has hired a lot of new people. What is their budget going to look like? How much of a priority is that going to be, right? Is the financial future of the university going to sacrifice things that we have fought for? I don't think we have the answers to those questions. They're not, right now we're just trying to survive and do the right thing in the moment, which is all we can ask of our leadership. But these are things we're going to have to face, right? We are not going to have the international students coming to this campus that we have had in the last 10, 15 years. What does that mean in terms of the tuition income of the university? What does it mean in terms of financial aid? Who's going to get that financial aid? These are all things that impact our students and our faculty and what our university is going to look like. So we all have a role to play in the outcome of that struggle. It's not preordained which way it's going to go. I think it's going to be really, really hard because ain't going to be no money. And we're being asked to make sacrifices now. You know, for me to take a wage cut, a freeze is one thing, but for a junior professor on a limited salary with a family is another thing. And so the suffering is not even, and the sacrifices are not being borne evenly. So I just want to say that all of this discussion we've had today, which I think has been really, really important, I think takes on a whole kind of meaning in what's going to come before us. And I think our graduate students are facing enormous challenges right now. Our graduate students are freaking out because they can't go do their research. And the ones who are about to get their degrees, there are no jobs out there because every university has a hiring freeze. And so what can we do about that? What are we going to do? These are the things that are preoccupying us at the moment. But I think as a collective, as a university, we have to really say, what does diversity inclusion look like post-pandemic? I don't think it's not going to be business as usual, but what is it going to look like? I think we play a part in determining what that's going to look like.
So to follow on May's comments, I would just suggest that you guys have an idea book. This is something that I tell to all of my graduate students, you know, because, you know, one day you'll be the professor, one day you may be leading a lab at a company or a group. And so I think during this time where things are changing so rapidly and our normal is constantly shifting every single day, you know, there are constant emails from the university and your departments and, you know, trying to get people together to brainstorm, you know, how we're going to address the immediate problems of today, literally today, but what's going to happen in a year, 2 years. And so I would just encourage you guys to have an idea book so that as you start your careers, you can bring forth, you know, very creative ideas to address our problems.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. I wish we could do, you know, a round of applause, but I hope that you can hear the applause. I hope that in some way that the applause and the appreciation is transmitting itself over the Zoom. Also, I wanted to pick up on some of the themes of both May and Christine's final comments, which is, you know, thinking about our finances, particularly as graduate students, thinking about our finances and our careers in this COVID and hopefully relatively soon post-COVID world. In anticipation of those questions, the Office of University Life has 2 upcoming workshops. We have actually one tomorrow at 2 o'clock, which is a financial wellness workshop, just thinking about, I'm a grad student, I have all these loans and job prospects are minimal. How do I manage that? So we'll be walking students through that. So that's at 2 o'clock. You can get more information about that on our website under events. And then the week after next, we're still putting the details together, so we don't yet have an exact date and time, but stay tuned and keep checking out our website. We'll send news of more events in the weekly e-blast that come from Professor Goldberg on Fridays. But we are also planning a career workshop, and we've pulled together a panel of career advisors to talk about what do we do in this moment? How can you think creatively about the skills that you've gained in graduate school and perhaps apply them in different ways? So look for both of those. Again, one is tomorrow, the financial wellness, and then the one on careers is the week after next. And the information about these events you can find on our website. So please stay tuned. Please plug in for those workshops as well. And along those lines, soon you'll be getting a survey about tonight's event. So please take a moment to fill out that survey and give us your feedback both on tonight's event as well as what you'd like to see us do going forward. We really look to those surveys and that feedback from students to help us think about our future offerings. But let me put a check there on those logistical pieces and just, again, offer my thanks to all of the panelists and to Professor Cross for moderating tonight's conversation, as well as to our co-sponsor for this event, which is the Office of the Vice Provost for Faculty Advancement, which is the office that created many of the documents that were referred to in tonight's conversation. Please check out all of those documents. I hope that all of you found inspiration and guidance from this conversation. I know that I did. And as we continue to navigate these times and offer you all programming, as I said, your feedback is incredibly valuable. So please take a moment to fill out the survey that will be sent to you shortly. And also please remember our Facebook group, so stay connected with us. Check out Columbia University Graduate Students of Color and Allies. I put the link to the Facebook group in the chat. And again, thank you everyone. Be well and stay safe. Good night.